Hello? Is that any better?
A little bit, yeah.
A little bit?
It's not loud.
Let me just bring you closer.
Talk again, Jess.
Sorry, 1 second. Wires. Okay, how is this? Is this
It's
any
all right,
better?
yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah, it's all right. Yeah,
Good.
She still feels a little far away, Tom, but...
I'm going to come right close to my computer. How am I doing? How am I reading?
Oh, perfect now. Yeah,
Great.
Good. Okay, right. So I'm going to do the opening titles.
Mm-hmm.
We'll crack straight in, because otherwise we'll end up talking about it before we start. The Spontaneity Shop presents The Guilty Feminist Watchers, and just like that, the Sex and the City Rehill, with me, Deborah Frances White, and my very special guest, Jessica Regan. Episode 4, Some of My Best Friends. So, Jess, what's your history with Sex and the City?
Pretty formative. It came out, I think, when I was about 16. And I was deemed old enough to watch it by my mother, and we would watch it every Thursday night on RTE television, and RTE would get it. Irish television would get it like right after America. I think even before the UK. They were funny like that. Things like Friends and X-Files, they were really on top of in Ireland. Oh. And I remember my mum and I would watch it together, and we just threw up the most incredible conversation points. And, I'm her youngest child, so she'd been through it. She was like, you know what, probably better that, this kind of stuff. But I just found it so refreshing and interesting. And I loved a show that centered that sex is important. It's nothing to be ashamed of, particularly having had a Catholic education. This was really refreshing and music to my ears. And like you've talked about in the other episodes, like Alison Spittle said, these women going for brunch in New York was the most glamorous, wonderful thing. It was so aspirational, and I think it did definitely fuel this, like, I want to live in a glittering metropolitan city, and so it really was very, very formative.
Did you think if it were not for Sex and the City, you may not have moved to London?
It definitely influenced London, and also it really influenced, like, I remember I had this whole thing. People were like, why haven't you been to America yet? And I said, I'm going to America when I can afford brunch. I don't want to do it on the cheap. I want to be in New York, and I want to get a fancy cocktail in a fancy bar and know my card will work. And then I will go to New York. And that's exactly what I did. But I think made myself and mom have this, my mother, amazing woman, have this very open and frank relationship about these things, which I think is very rare and unusual. So it was its own gift. And I felt very protective of it when the second film came out. And I get it. The second film is an abomination. I get it. But I remember one review describing them as venal sluts. And I remember thinking, they're not being tried for crimes at The Hague. Like this, they made a shitty film. Like, can we calm down? Yeah. And I remember thinking what it did for sex positivity in my life. I felt like people don't get that there is a significance here. There is good things here.
Oh, completely. In its day, it was so influential.
There was nothing like it.
So innovative. There was some kind of article somewhere last week that said times that Samantha was unnecessarily slut-shamed by her friends. And it was pointing out that, Carrie had slut-shamed her because she had given a blowjob to a UPS guy. Mm-hmm. And I actually commented, very rare that I will comment to someone I don't know on the internet, but I said, no, that's I didn't say this patronizingly, but I am saying it here.
Sure.
People misunderstand the difference between story and things that happen in stories.
Oh my God.
She wasn't unnecessarily slut-shamed by her friends. Because of that episode and episodes like it, the general population was educated as to the concept of slut-shaming. I would suspect that without Sex and the City, we may not even have that turn of phrase in such a broad part of society, because it was Samantha's response where she said something like, I will blow whomever I want, however I want, as long as I have knees and breath
in my body.
Like that. Yes, exactly.
It was Shakespearean.
And she said, I won't be shamed by you or anybody. And so the slut shaming reflected what happened in society all the time, even amongst good friends. And it was her powerful response. And Carrie saying, you're right, and I'm sorry. And you didn't judge me when I had an affair, but I'm judging you for some casual encounter. Why? And what's that about? And it made her question her relationship with sex and society. And so I think things like that Sex and the City gave us, this powerhouse, beautiful, well-dressed, successful woman like Samantha going, oh, no. This is my choice, and this is how I choose to live. And this is absolutely, there's nothing wrong with pleasure. There's nothing to be ashamed of. And there's nothing particularly morally superior about commitment if that's not what you want. Because ultimately Samantha showed us that wasn't what she wanted. It didn't make her happy in the same way that lots of sexual encounters did. And speaking of Samantha, do you think that Seema, who is Carrie's new real estate agent, is she the new Samantha? I think that's what they're driving at here.
I mean, there's only one Samantha, but I think they are throwing a stunningly beautiful, non-bereaved single woman into the mix. And I have to say, and I know we're jumping ahead a little bit, I had my issues with this episode, but the exchange between Seema and Carrie towards the end of the episode, I gave a little clap, because as someone who has been single kind of on and off for about 6 years now, some of what Seema was saying really chimed with me, but I don't know how much you want to get into that.
Oh, well, we're going to do a quick recap.
Yeah.
Would you like to do the recap, or do you want me to do it?
I've handed over to DFW.
Okay, quick recap. On Carrie's front, she woke up in her old apartment, the one that we know and love, because she had walked there the night before in the previous episode and decided she didn't want to go and sleep in her own biggest bed. And so we woke up there. It's all beautifully done up, and it doesn't look like her old bachelor pad from the noughties, but it's got the same geography, the same shape, the same wardrobe. It's really lovely. She wakes up, she can hear the garbage trucks. It's all downtown again. It's not the big fancy uptown penthouse. And goes and visits an old haunter coffee shop bodega in her local neighborhood. I think we're heading towards her deciding she's going to live back in her old place. In the meantime, she decides too many ghosts in the old apartment. She's going to sell it. She makes friends with an estate agent we've already referenced called Seema, who is on dating apps. In the meantime, Miranda gets ribbed by her son and his girlfriend about smelling like marijuana. We know that she has had a little puff of marijuana in the form of a sexy shotgun the night before. She denies this, and we see her go out for a dinner with her college lecturer, who inexplicably, although she's managed to tangle herself up in this college lecturer braids, I mean, metaphorically and almost literally. Somehow this college lecturer, this incredible black woman, wants to hang out with Miranda because she wants to talk to her about the complications of motherhood as she's doing fertility treatment versus, living your full life as your whole self, child-free, and the opportunities that affords you. Charlotte's plot line is...
Well, this was rough.
Evoking the original episodes again. Why can they not just be relaxed about Charlotte's best friend at school is black? Why can't she just be relaxed with that?
You're stressing me out.
Why
Charlotte,
have they decided these women have only met black people last year? I understand they have changed their social circles since the noughties, but it's like, honestly, they were literally introduced to black people last week before the show started. And I'm like, have they not
having culture shock over and over again? It is demonic. It is ridiculous. Like, these are New York women. They weren't they weren't in Aspen. They weren't holed up in Aspen, in a sort of a white enclave and then were brought to the city. These are sophisticated New York women. Miranda had a black partner for a time. That was quite a serious relationship.
Yes.
Why
are they so strange
cringing
about it? So LTW, who is, I think in a previous episode, we've decided possibly the most beautiful woman in the world.
Truly.
And I'm delighted that there's one black woman in this show who is allowed to just be glamorous, beautifully dressed, clearly draped in designer labels, uptown, drinking the cocktails, mixing the mixes, all of that the white women got to do through the whole of the 90s and the noughties.
Yeah.
How that's amazing. Why will we not
has
allowed to see that
mother-in-law
before?
issues.
He has mother-in-law issues.
Mother-in-law issues, like just as perennial as grass. One thing that I thought was, I almost thought, was this a comedy beat that was missed, or have they underplayed it? When Harry was like, oh, you know what, that goes really well with port if your husband drinks. And she went, oh, he drinks, he has to. He's married to this. And I'm like, yeah. He's on his knees thanking God every day for his blessed life. Are you, as the most beautiful woman in the world, stood in a doorway?
Yes, like, the most beautiful together, successful.
Oh, yeah.
She says she clearly makes documentaries because she references, I pretend I'm talking to
my film crew. I mean, I can't.
So
I cannot with this woman.
Clearly a successful documentary maker who has the most beautiful apartment anybody's ever seen. But the conceit in this is, Charlotte is becoming closer friends with the most glamorous woman in the world, LTW. Mm-hmm. LTW happens to be African American, and Charlotte has an opportunity to have this woman to her home. Mm-hmm. Strangely, she's not had her there before, given their closest friends on the board of the school, or in some kind of...
They only met black people 2 weeks ago, though, Deborah. So actually the timeline does check out.
Absolutely strange.
What is
happening? Anyway, let's be generous and say, okay, they clearly have been working together, but now Charlotte sees this as an opportunity for a friendship. She likes her a lot. She's now being invited into a social circle. Let's be generous and say that's what's happening. So Charlotte has an opportunity to have LWT to her place, but in 2 nights' time. And she panics and realizes that everyone else on the guest list will be white, and she doesn't want LTW and her husband to turn up and think she doesn't have any black friends. So Harry says, well, we've got, what about the people in 4D? And she's, great, we've got black neighbours. We went to brunch with them once. And he says, not for 2 years. And she says, well, COVID killed a year. So she basically tries to force the woman who is not free.
In a stalky, uncomfortable, truly obnoxious way.
Very uncomfortable way. And then starts ringing around and says, Anthony, remember that black guy you dated a while ago who was an artist? Can we have him? And Anthony's onto her and goes, no, I don't have his details anymore, but there's an ethnically ambiguous delivery guy here that I can help you with, because he knows exactly what she's doing. And he's the only one in her world who will presumably name it and say that's what you're doing. So she hangs up on him and is so desperate to have another black person there. She invites someone neither of them like at the school, who they've sort of teamed up against.
It's all about Mean Girls. I was like,
just socially, not brutally or cruelly, but they've sort of made an alliance against a woman who they feel has overstepped a mark.
Who had the temerity, the audacity to suggest an alternative day trip for the students.
I don't know what she was thinking, looking back. So anyway, then LTW can't come on that anyway, so this dinner party comes crashing down. Charlotte and Harry go to their dinner party, which is, I think, a birthday party for LTW's husband. Birthday. And lo and behold, they are the only white people there, because LTW only has black friends. Now, I am not suggesting that an uptown, very glamorous black couple would not only have black friends. Mm-hmm. I'm saying I would think that would be unusual, but I'm not saying it's not. It's not for me, a white person, to say that wouldn't be the case. What I am going to go out on a limb and say is, if you were an African-American couple, a very glamorous, very wealthy African-American couple who only had black friends, and you now had one white friend, I am telling you this, it would not be Charlotte York. It's not going to be Charlotte York. I can imagine.
I didn't know where this was going, but I can
imagine an uptown black couple who have lots of friends of different races and lots of white friends, and one of those might be Charlotte York.
Maybe the black friends all had a bet amongst them, going, who could bet bring you to meet the whitest couple? Person. Who's going to bring? And they have dinner parties, and there's always and like it's like it's almost like a dinner party, Hunger Games, or like a parlor game. Who can bring the whitest person? And when they go to someone else's,
See You Next Tuesday. That film about
and they'll go to Marcus's next week, and Marcus will be like, "This is Chad from work."
Yes,
and he'll be like, "Oh, hey," and he'll be in chinos. and
like a
talking
Saturday
about
Night Live sketch.
Yeah, talking about cryptocurrency and Joe Rogan, and they'll be like, "Oh, it's tough. Chad is tough." That is the only thing I can think of. But it's what I find a little bit. Why are we going through this? Why can't we? You and Tom have this like wonderful improv background, and you taught me so much. And the thing was like, start the story at like the latest possible moment. And we're doing this race relations preamble that we just don't need. It's shoe leather. And I wonder if this episode is truly the casualty of Willie Garson's passing, because it was so it felt off kilter, it felt strange. And then
suddenly Stanford has left a note saying he's going to Japan to support a TikTok star and would like to divorce Anthony. And I do not feel that in any way, shape or form respects Stanford's contribution. And I understand why they thought they could not kill him off, because Big had died.
Because Carrie would be in the Hudson.
But I just think the only respectful thing to do was to have Stanford either pass away and have her deal with it, or I don't know, something else, because it feels like he's just never going to come back and they're just not going to mention him again. And
he could have had COVID and had to isolate. He could have had long COVID.
Oh, COVID would have been good. They've written COVID out of this, though. COVID's in the past in this.
But I suppose, I think that was the thing. It felt like a 4:00 in the morning. What the hell are we going to do? It felt like it was from a writer who didn't grow up with Sex and the City.
Yeah.
And I just was like, you don't know, Stanley. It's so...
I feel if they were going to give Stanford a career out, it needed to be something big, because she says, if he considers this good news, I guess I want to know the good news. And I'm like, no, well then let him have a huge opportunity, and let's see her call him and say, Stanford's just FaceTimed me and said, let's see her at the airport waving him off.
Yeah.
Just see this
her
plane
and Anthony
go.
holding each other, and actually giving us even if they're mourning him, if they're waving off, or if it's like standing off the opportunity of a lifetime. I don't know. I just think it was the strangest. Again, not committing to anything.
Yeah,
it's making just standing a little bit
dismissive about. I don't get it. I don't get who this TikTok kid is and why he needs to go to Japan, and the fact that he breaks up with her on a Post-it. Not to get into my I've evoking old episodes.
No, I love your evoking. I might
have to go into evoking.
I think it's supposed to. Did he burger her?
Stanford burgers her. That is
Stanford
not
burger
fair.
Carrie.
Stanford was always there, looking into her eyes, telling her she was worth more. Stanford would never break up with her on a Post-it.
No, he wouldn't. Speaking of callbacks, my sister pointed out a really good one, and I don't know if this came up in Alison's in the last episode. But remember when Carrie spilled coffee all over herself? Sorry, this is a little callback. It's like, remember when she spilled coffee on Big at Aidan's furniture booth? And they bumped into Natasha.
Okay.
Big.
So when did she spill coffee over herself?
When the
coffee overflows.
In the previous episode. Sorry, I'm going back. Because I couldn't find any callbacks until you said the Post-it one. But... FYI, just a little coffee callback in the previous one.
Okay, so when she spilt coffee over herself
and burnt herself seeing Natasha, it was like when she spilled coffee over Big, seeing Big and Natasha at Aidan's furniture booth.
Okay, that is so weird, because that episode is evoked in this episode as well.
Go on.
Do you know why?
No, tell me more. I love this game.
Do you remember when Carrie and Aidan in that episode are minding his booth?
Yeah, and she's his booth bitch.
Yeah, she's his booth bitch.
Mm-hmm.
Natasha and Big turn up, and then Big comes back alone and he's drunk. Do you remember what he says? Everything in my apartment is beige. Beige is bullshit. Do you remember he says that to her?
Yeah.
And what is said in this week's episode when she says, the realtor, Seema, says, everything's so beautiful, everything's so colourful, but this isn't good to sell a place with. She says, my husband didn't like beige.
Yeah. And Carrie in the booth bitch episode has the best comeback I think she's ever had in any series, when he goes, it's not working. And she goes, oh, go sleep in your beige bed. Yes.
Yeah.
That was a good one.
Absolutely. So I'm going to run through some things that I think evoke old episodes now.
Mm-hmm.
The biggest one for me, and the most obvious one for me, is Carrie has a cigarette.
I know. It felt so transgressive. That's where we're at now. It was like she literally did some crack in front of us.
Because now the thing is...
Inside a car as well.
Inside a car,
Madness.
absolutely, which absolutely evokes how Big used to pull up sitting in the back seat of a car and he had his driver role. Now, Carrie never smoked with any of her friends. She only smoked with Big. She smoked alone or she smoked with Big.
Yeah.
Aidan hated her smoking. The friends hated her smoking. And they used to say to her, give up smoking. Not even Samantha shared a cigarette with her. And Samantha was the most likely to be the party girl. She smoked with Big. And so this cigarette is a lean back. It reminding her of the days when she smoked with Big. Mm-hmm. And at one point, when they've fallen in the pond together, and they're back at his place and she's, in his bathrobe, he says, do you want to smoke? She says, I don't smoke anymore. And he says, that's a shame. We always enjoyed a smoke together. She says, we did a lot of things that were bad for me together.
Yeah.
And so this smoking, to me, is holding hands with the Big of the past when they were out there, naughty, having affairs, having good times, being young, being reckless. She was her old party girl self. And that first drag of the cigarette is both holding hands with her past of being a single girl out there and holding hands with her future of, I'm going to have to go back there again. And as she says to Seema, put myself out there again. And the conversation you evoked that she has with Seema, would you want to talk a little bit about why that meant something to you?
Because I thought, so here's where we're sort of wading our way. It's an uphill slog through this crazily, unnecessarily clunky, tin-eared kind of race relations. And the thing that I'm confused about, Tony, is how much are we meant to think Charlotte's being ridiculous, or are we going, classic problems? That's the thing that I'm unsure of. But and then out of nowhere, kind of then there's there's the lotus in the mud with all that nonsense, and then there's this exchange between Seema and Carrie, where Seema has totally accidentally knocked over a frame, a picture of her and Big, and the glass is broken. And Carrie's point is he's touched that glass. You can't just replace the glass. He's touched that glass and it was precious, and has a totally understandable reaction to this. And Seema's kind of quietly going, yeah, really sorry, staying calm. And she goes, well, you're being very insensitive to me. And Seema's like, no, I'm not that person. I'm very sorry this has happened. Please don't think. I guess we can all come across as insensitive sometimes, like you did the other day. And I remember thinking, I don't remember. It had been so well acted.
I knew exactly what she was talking about because I clocked it in the moment.
I didn't clock it, which then made it kind of a nice thing for me when she said, still putting your... So you said, and I thought it was really good writing. I almost wondered if it was I just loved the way she went, you said something like, no, actually, this is exactly what you said because I remember. When you're really upset by something someone said, it sears itself. You word for word, you can testify in a court of law, And she quotes her back to her and she's like, you said, good for you for still putting yourself out there still. And I think for me, it's not that that's been said to me or anything, but that sometimes there can be an insensitivity.
Can I just say, by the way, you're a lot younger than Seema. I don't see why anyone would say that to you. You're still in your 30s. Seema's clearly in her 50s.
Absolutely. Where the Venn diagram crosses over is just a casual throwaway thing that someone says to you about your single state, that you're fine with being single until that thing is said to you.
Are you still putting yourself out there? Oh, that's so great for you. It's
and you're like, yeah, or just things, they can be really seemingly innocuous. But I remember, I have a couple of exes that I'm not on speaking terms with, and that's a really good thing and a healthy thing for everyone involved. But since then, I have a couple of exes who I am very friendly with and are in my phone and are good men who I still kind of might have a coffee with or chat or, all good stuff. And I was saying this quite proudly to a friend of mine who had been in a long-term relationship, always had someone carrying her bags, always had, someone sharing the labor, physical and emotional. And they were like, why would you go back? Why would you even bother staying friends with anyone? It's over, let it go. And I remember just thinking, you don't understand that, that's a milestone for me and that I've now inculcated healthier dynamics. But from your prism, it's if they're not the one, why would you bother? And kind of wanting to put you into boxes. People really want to put single people into boxes. They want to stream them. And even Carrie, even the queen of single women, was doing that in that moment. And I thought that was well represented. It was interesting. And also about the nature of insensitivity, how sometimes people really are coming across differently than how they think in their heads. The way Seema, Carrie read Seema being very insensitive, and Seema was like, I'm quietly, calmly sitting here and hearing you.
Yes.
And how that, I thought, I was like, oh, now I'm interested.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But is there a question, Deborah, where all these characters of colour are being brought in to teach the white ladies lessons? That's what I'm concerned about, that they're not being three-dimensional in themselves. Is there a danger that they're just here to teach lessons, to make these white women better people? That would be a very harsh assessment, but like, is it one we need to?
Yes. Well, I feel so far with Seema that there does seem to be an exchange, because this isn't about race. This is about, hey, you don't know what it's like to be a widow. Well, hey, you don't know what it's like to never have had the opportunity to be a widow and never will have that opportunity to have a long-term love in the same way that you've had it. That's fine. We teach each other things as friends all the time, and we enlighten each other all the time. To me, the problem is when the lessons are constantly about race, because it's reducing characters like LTW to her race, and clearly she is so much more. And Charlotte's meant to save the day because she knows all of these amazing black artists in LTW's house and says what a great investment they all are to her mother-in-law. So she sort of saves the day for LTW in one way. But I'm like, again, really, LTW only has black artists. And it's like this weird, strange world where LTW, you go to her house, she only has black friends, she only has black artists, her whole life is blackness, her whole life is African-Americanness. Now, I'm not saying there are no African-Americans like that, and it's not for me to say, what LTW would or wouldn't be like. It's just strange that then that kind of person would make friends with Charlotte, the whitest person in the world, who also can't recognize one black person over another one, accidentally calls one of her friends the wrong name, and just is the clunkiest white person to invite to that. And it just seems very strange to me that she's like, she adores Charlotte. She thinks Charlotte's wonderful. And I'm like, I listen, I am sure many black people have, clunky white friends. I'm sure I have been a clunky white friend. White people
100%. Like for me, speaking for me, I'm not like, I know you have 100%. Like, of course,
no, I'm not singling myself out as some kind of better white person. Of course not.
Me neither.
But I am saying it's such a strange world. It's like Charlotte gets to go into African-American Disneyland, and it's like, I would love to see her go, and she's got a Jeff Koons, because
it's a good investment.
It's a good investment. And it's not like this absolutely wall to wall. And Charlotte knows about African-American art. Thank goodness, save the day is saved. And poor Harry has to keep making jokes about African-American authors
I love Michelle Obama's book.
That Charlotte's primed him for, and is worried he's going to be too clunky. Harry and Anthony have the best lines in this whole, the laugh lines. The men keep getting the laugh lines, which is strange because it used to be the women with the singers, and Anthony, to be fair.
I wrote in my notes when they were having the conversation about art, I wish these were my problems. Oh, gee, my mother-in-law isn't impressed with all the amazing art I bought for my Upper East Side apartment. Like, I'm sorry that I'm not like going, I'm so glad Charlotte saved the day. I'm really rooting for this. It's like, all fine. You're all fine.
I mean,
this isn't the problems.
It is the Sex and the City world, though, where problems are very uptown, first world. I
totally agree, and I love frivolity. I love frivolity. I love like the shoes going missing at the dinner party, like back in the day. I love all that. But for me, it's almost like a great weight and solemnity was given almost to something. It's where the tones keep jarring. Tones jarred a lot for me in this episode, where I thought, should that have been light, silly, fun and throwaway? But actually, it felt kind of like, this is a really big deal, the way Charlotte knows all her art. And like, it went on and on. That's the thing that I'm kind of scratching my chin
it's
over.
not like, well, with this collector, she points to sort of 5 different African-American artists and names them all. And it's like, we get it. We get the idea. Charlotte knows a lot about the history of art and makes LTW look good in front of her mother-in-law. Other evokings... When Carrie wakes up in her old apartment, we see a couple of historic outfits.
Oh, yes.
One is the multicolored dress that she wore when applying for a bank loan
Mm-hmm.
in Sex and the City,
Mm-hmm.
in order that she could afford the apartment that she's in. So I think that's why she looked at it. And ultimately, she had to go cap in hand to Big to get advice. He tried to give her a check and she said no because they weren't together at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And instead, she got the money from Charlotte's engagement ring,
Yep.
the one that Trey had given her. And so female friendship saved the day. Although that was always a very odd episode, the way she was angry with Charlotte for not offering the money. That was very strange to me.
It was truly wild that but there was something I suppose is it very human to like as in you're way off beam here, like you're mad I won't give you $40,000.
I mean,
like,
absolutely
girl,
extraordinary.
like come on.
Imagine
and I actually loved when
friend.
Charlotte went, your money problems aren't my problems. Like
Yeah.
Charlotte was quite a badass in that episode. And then had a change of heart that did feel quite organic. But we had the white dress with the gold flower as well.
From the first
Iconic.
film.
Iconic.
And again, that was about her and the four girls meeting and the cornerstone of the show, which is friendship to me, not sex. So we saw both of those. And then in the putting yourself out there scene, the conversation that you really liked, this evokes an episode where Charlotte goes to some kind of seminar for single women.
Oh, yeah.
And it's about putting yourself out there. And if you're really out
Really,
there,
if
it's
you
like
really
The
want
Secret.
it.
It's
Yeah,
like that
yeah.
idea. And Carrie defends Charlotte publicly and says, oh, she's out there. And she's like, she says, well, maybe you're not really out there. She's like, she is out there. She grabs the mic.
It's so funny. It was very good. And I loved, actually, I think that's the episode where Harry ends up dedicating her book to Charlotte because Charlotte was the most optimistic, romantic, hanging in there, putting herself out there gal of all of them.
Yes.
And it was really lovely because you'd expect her to dedicate it to all the girls, but she dedicated it to Charlotte, who, she gave her shit for not giving her 40 grand. So yeah, she probably owed her a solid after that loan. But it was just, I remember thinking that was really nice. Like, I never sneered at Charlotte. I kind of loved her earnestness and laughed along with her. Whereas now I'm like, you're being ridiculous. Like, it's slightly making me eye roll at Charlotte, whereas I didn't before. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, indeed. Can I tell you the conversation that felt very real to me?
Please.
It was the conversation between Miranda and her college professor, Naya. Naya says it might be the hormones speaking because I've taken all of these hormones for fertility treatment, but I'm going to confess some things to you now. And I did fertility treatment and it does mess with in my case, it did very much mess with me hormonally. And I found it very difficult because you're putting things into every orifice. I'm not making that up. You have pessaries, you have nasal sprays, ear drops, injections. You're injecting stuff into your legs. It's just unbelievable how much stuff you're putting into your body. And it made me very emotionally unstable. And what she's examining is exactly what I was examining when I was doing fertility treatment, because Naya's saying, the thing is, my life's not perfect, no one's is, but it's pretty close. Like, I have this incredible life and I'm living the life. I'm doing the thing that I want to do. I'm in a good relationship. Like, am I going to destabilize it with a baby? But then on the other hand, am I going to regret not having a baby? And that's really why I'm doing it. And what Miranda says is very profound, I think. She says having a child doesn't take away regret.
Oh, that was powerful.
She says, I look at someone who was at college with me and she didn't get married, didn't have children, is now a federal judge. And Naya says, but she goes home to an empty house. And Miranda says, there are days when I would love to be a judge and go home to an empty house. It's such a funny line.
It's a great line.
But yeah, she says, my son, her 17-year-old son, she says he's just called me a bitch because I sent home his girlfriend and told him to do his homework. And she refers to his dirty underwear being on her kitchen floor, which is really too low about her kitchen floor.
Well, listen, Brady's a little shit who needs to kick up the hole, as my people would say. Honestly, that kid.
I understand dirty underwear on the bathroom floor, but on the kitchen floor, that's a bit much. That's a line to be crossed.
Honestly, yeah, totally.
And yeah, so she says, look, there are days when motherhood is wonderful, moments, and there's other days and times when motherhood is not wonderful. Also, she doesn't seem to be very connected to her husband anymore. They don't seem to be having any fun, or much fun anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And so she's saying, look, there is this alternative life when, you know that career has been the most important thing to Miranda, and now for some inexplicable reason, human rights is more important to her than her whole corporate
Well,
degree,
when she saw those protests, Deborah, she knew she had to be part of the solution.
Exactly.
When she saw those protests, that moment turned it all around. Turned
it all around, which if it did, I would like her to be further along in 2021, given those happened in 2017. Anyway, I would like that evolution to have been completed. But, okay, I understand what she's saying, and I feel like Miranda could now be a judge with influence. She probably would have been happier, Miranda, with a series of lovers and no children. That's what I'm guessing.
And
I don't
maybe
think
maybe a series
really turned out to be this shining light. I think if she had this great relationship with him now, and they were kind of best buds, and she was going to visit him at college, and or whatever, or he was becoming a lawyer and she was mentoring him, that would be different. But it turns out he is not that fun a person right now. So I rather wonder.
Certainly haven't written him like that. They've given him very little redeeming characteristics whatsoever, and there's a dissatisfaction permeating Miranda's life. But to speak to your point about the writing, just when she talked about roads not taken, and I always, sometimes when my friends ask me what should I do, I say whatever decision you make will be the right one, because it's the only one you could make in that moment. Not always. Sometimes you have to have an intervention and go, give me your phone. You are not texting him. Sometimes you do have to be a little bit more active. But I would say in general, if you're about taking a job, about moving somewhere, about having kids or not having kids, it's like whatever you decide, we'll work with it and we'll be here for each other. And because you just can't know. It made me think as well about something a friend said to me years ago about how when things pass you by, like if her fertility treatment fails, say, this character, anytime something doesn't work out the way you wanted it to, I know this might sound a bit cookie cutter, Christmas cracker Pollyanna, but deep protection. There is deep protection. There are jobs I haven't gotten. And then I've heard about an awful time someone had on set, and I go, I wouldn't have been robust enough to deal with that, or things that haven't worked out. And I thought that Miranda was kind of, to see these two women having a very nuanced conversation about motherhood was really interesting, and not a binary conversation. And then when Miranda kind of at the end goes, but it'll be wonderful, because you got to kind of a little bit of sugar with your medicine, I just, that scene was stand out to me, and the Seema scene, and then it was just a lot of nonsense around that.
It's true. There were some fun moments in this episode, though. I think it is getting more towards old Sex of the City. There's a moment when the social media person comes in and shouts at all the podcasters on Carrie's podcast for not being on social media, which, again, no one would do that. They wouldn't. They'd say, if I wanted to say to someone, if I was producing, I do produce people's podcasts, and I might say, some people are on social, some people aren't, but if you needed to get the numbers up, you might say, it'd be great if you did some more social media on this week, but you wouldn't shout at them in the way that she does. But there's a funny moment where her colleague says, I would totally play the death card, for saying why you're not doing more on social media, given this woman had sort of put her foot in it and used a lot of accidental death analogies. And Carrie says, oh, I'm going to, but I'm saving it for when she tells me I have to go back on Twitter, which made me laugh.
But I would say that let's talk about the real villains of the series. There are two. One is Carrie's abusive, toxic workplace, because if people aren't telling her to step her pussy up, they're ignoring the fact that she's in deep grief. Like,
why
honestly,
does she need to that
why
job,
are
though?
people horrible
She's
to this
so
woman
wealthy.
who's 55? Where is the respect from any character in this workplace? They are the rudest little brats.
On that podcast.
Doesn't fit at all. Then the other villain is that goddamn Peloton that will not die.
Oh,
the Peloton kept appearing. It was like Freddy Krueger. I was like, Jesus Christ, it's back. What the hell, man?
She literally got that Peloton out of. I would be.
Is this a Blumhouse? Is this like a Blumhouse joint? Like, why is the Peloton back? And it was really sinisterly framed.
Yes.
Like, oh my God.
She gave it to a doorman. Next thing you knew, it was back. It was. That's so funny. That's so funny.
Like the kid out of the
Poor
room.
Peloton.
Like, what's happening?
They must be like for God's sake, can you
Pal,
please
listen.
stop mentioning our product?
However, I don't know what I know you've had a really rough week, Deborah, with COVID and everything and Christmas plans and things being cancelled, but you still haven't had as bad a week as Peloton.
No, that's true. That's absolutely
for a lot
true.
of reasons.
That's absolutely true. COVID hasn't had a bad as week as Peloton.
COVID
the COVID brand is up.
COVID has had better PR than
Actually,
Peloton.
to be fair, I think Peloton are probably doing all right out of it because a lot of people who've never heard of Peloton are now like, but they're trying to do ads saying we won't kill you. So do you have any predictions for how the rest of the season is going to play out, Jess?
They're doing some incredibly strange track laying for an intervention with Miranda.
Oh my God, every week though.
What?
We get it. You've hinted at it a lot. Like you need to either have the intervention or not.
What is happening right now?
She just seems to be like a Londoner though. She seems to be like
honestly,
a functional person who enjoys wine all the time.
Yeah. Like,
in New York, your friends are like, oh my God. It's like that episode of Friends where they're like, did you notice Fun Bobby drank, X amount of wine? And it's like, but he was fun. So
it was
not really
what's going on. It's just really strange choices with this journey. It's so hard to grab a hold of it because I could so see a really interesting journey of just a couple of glasses turning into a bottle, turning into 2 bottles, and this creeping up on her really subtly and actually friends not noticing. But when you have things like miniature liquor bottles in her backpack or having a glass of wine at 11:30, you're like, well, this is like if somebody Googled signs someone might be an alcoholic and these popped up. That's what it feels like. And they go, quick, we better crowbar something. Whereas I think there's a much kind of more interesting, hey, man, are you like her like blacking out or her like something that just is going a bit too far. And it really makes sense.
We never see her drunk. We never see her drunk.
No.
And that's the interesting thing for me because Miranda is so functional.
Yeah.
She's going to bed at last thing at night, having a really...
She takes her makeup off. Clearly.
Intense conversation with her husband, sort of like, this happened or whatever. She's totally on it at every single conversation. She's never drifting out. She doesn't seem to be using it as a sort of self-medication so I don't know. What we're seeing is Americans getting upset by people drinking at times when they think they shouldn't be drinking, but we're not seeing any downsides of the drinking.
There's a cultural chasm
in London,
here as well.
I just think people just let you get on with it unless you are in some way or another, having problems with it. And then, of course, we'll have that conversation. But it's very unusual in London.
It's like, did you see that she had a glass of wine? And it's like, and then the other thing was, so I think there's a bit of a cultural issue here because weed is legal. And I feel this like so Miranda has like a scotch before the funeral, and it's all about ooh. And then you have Jay vaping a weed product. And that's meant to be absolutely fine and cool and Miranda needs to chill. And I'm like, why is weed utterly fine and people are sparking up in indoor venues and that's all fine, whereas like she had a 3rd glass of wine.
She had a Cabernet
like
Sauvignon.
It feels very like there's a little cultural chasm there because obviously weed isn't legal over here. That's not, that's a different thing, and yet like what Miranda's drinking, although like I said, the 11:30 thing doesn't look much, and really it doesn't knit together. And I just feel like you have to take great care and have authenticity with any addiction storyline. And I'm surprised that care wasn't taken because. There certainly was care taken with the styling. They look fantastic. Harry's hair never better.
I suspect that the storyline will be Miranda realizes she needs to quit booze and at the same time she won't smoke a joint with her new lover, Jay. That's what I'm guessing it will be. Or she'll discover that weed is better for her than booze, which for some people it is. For some people, they can do one and not the other. And I wish weed were legal here because in many cases, if you were starting a country from scratch, you'd legalize weed before booze.
Truly.
But yeah, it is a strange one. It's for a Londoner to watch because we are not seeing any downsides to the booze. So for me, I'm like, look, she's in her 50s. She knows what she can handle. She knows what she can't handle.
Yeah.
She's perfectly functional. It's just not for them to say that she's not functional if she clearly is. She's not struggling. Like, I don't know. I don't get it.
Yeah. And when Charlotte said, we don't need another bottle, Miranda was like, okay. She was like, oh, come on, Charlotte. You always spoil things. She was like, okay, no no problem. I'll go back. That's cool.
Yeah, it's very strange. The Charlotte promise is her child is non-binary, but we didn't see anything about that this week. Miranda's promise is that she's going to start a love affair with Carrie's colleague Jay. And Carrie has been having this tiny flirt through the glass with the producer of the podcast.
He has a sign on his head saying successor.
Yeah, I mean, but it's very gradual build. They're edging.
When I saw him behind the glass, I was like, oh, they're going to kill Big. That's how I knew. When I saw a silver fox behind the glass, I was like, age-appropriate love interest for Carrie, and she would never have an affair on Big. By the way, how do we feel about Carrie's name being Caroline?
I think we might have known that.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I think we've possibly heard that before. And I suspect in the Young Carrie Diaries, which is a teenage show about the young Carrie Bradshaw,
which I've never seen. Don't recognise it.
I've never seen it, but I believe there was a youth, a YA show. And I suspect I knew she was Caroline.
Well, if it's a YA show, then it's not my demographic.
Me neither, but I suspect we knew it. But yes, that was really confirmed in canon for the first time because the man in the bodega calls her Caroline. So I am going to be interested to see what happens. I suspect we're going to see both Miranda and Carrie doing some exploration into sex and romance. I suspect Seema's going to join the group and be more of a Samantha-y figure. I don't know if she's going to be a permanent part-time member of the group. I suspect we'll go back to the core three.
I think she might keep her a bit separate and distinct because she's like all her friends knew Big, knew everything. It seems like a little holiday from the Big of it all because she only ever knew her after Big. AB.
Yeah, and they've said that explicitly, so it helps.
When that was in the writing, I thought, that really rings true. And she's like, we just had lunch and we just chatted and it was lovely. But I think
she doesn't feel sorry for me because she doesn't know me.
Yeah, so I wonder will she keep her a little bit separate to the gang in order to preserve that? But again, is that interesting? Because what's interesting
she's
is
going to be folded in. In my opinion, she's going to be folded in because she is this permanently single, out there on all the dating apps, which is, the sort of what Samantha would be, I guess.
Yeah.
Having the time.
And she's given us like Selling Sunset energy, she's giving us powerful realtor in beautiful clothes and fabulous 100%. Cars. And I'm super here for it. Because we really are missing the Samantha glamour. We're missing so much from Samantha, but definitely that kind of like, that just the extra, and like when she like, put out the cigarette butt with a pair of Pradas, I was like, yes, or whatever she had on her feet, it was something very fancy. I was like, yeah, like some moments of boldness like that, like the fun of it all.
Yes, I'm really hopeful for more fun as we get further away from Big, back into her. I think they were looking at maybe her buying another place, but I think she's going to go back to her old place because it's what we want. So I suspect she's going to live back in her old flat, single life, and start having a glamorous love affair with the producer. And we're going to see a little bit more fun, and we're going to stop talking about Big so much. That's my guess.
Well, I think everybody wants that all around.
Jess.
Yes.
It has been an absolute joy. Thank you so much for joining us.
I want to thank you because this is honestly a huge Christmas present. This show, I've had a loving, complicated relationship like you have with all great things. And,
all great problematic things.
All great problematic, multi-layered, nuanced things. But for something, it was such a pleasure to be asked to discuss this because it's endlessly fascinating. And wherever you stand on it, it throws up conversations about IVF, friendship, race relations, all these things. It throws it up. But just seriously, Carrie, stop doing that podcast, man.
She doesn't need to do it. She's so rich. Do your own podcast. Why is she not doing a podcast for single women and with a like an agony aunt thing? I don't understand.
Should be doing fingers crossed. What if the end season finale is actually her and Samantha launch their own podcast? Could you imagine? Samantha on a podcast?
I think they would be wonderful, and I think the chances of Kim Cattrall coming back are very slim.
Oh, yes.
Do you have anything to plug?
For insights like this and more, do follow me at It's Just Regan on Twitter. I have a wonderful podcast called Best Pick, where we look at film from a variety of different angles. We have a book coming out, which is his journey through Hollywood and the Oscars, coming out in February, available to pre-order now. And that's it, really, yeah.
Excellent. Check out Best Pick and It's Jess Regan. Also go on Jess Regan's Big Speeches. If you are a guilty feminist, it's an online course to help you come into yourself and communicate fully. Very, very good. And it gets great reviews. Thank you so much, Jess Regan.
Thank you. Thank you.
And
Thanks so much.
thank you to our listeners. You have been listening to The Guilty Feminist Watchers, and just like that, with me, Deborah Frances-White, my very special guest, Jessica Regan. The producer for The Spotted Data Shop was Tom Selinsky. The Guilty Feminist is part of the Acast Creator Network. Just like that, it's on HBO Max in the United States and Sky Comedy in the UK. Join us next time for episode 5, Tragically Hip.